Hello and welcome to our webcast for June 15, 2018.
Yeah.
My name is Christian Debré and this is Amy Asbrook, the director of Toujours Vivant, Not Dead Yet. Also joining us is Taylor Hyatt, our policy analysis and outreach coordinator.
Hi.
Toujours Vivant, Not Dead Yet is a non-religious organization by and for people with disability and our allies.
Yeah.
Our goal is to inform, unify, and give voice to the disability rights opposition to assisted suicide, euthanasia, and other ending of life practices that discriminate against people with disabilities. Today's topics: new CDC report on rising U.S. suicide rate. And second one is the American Medical Association, EMA, okay, to continue studying its position to on assisted suicide. Sorry. Amy Asbrook will help us through this subject.
I'll do my best. Okay. So the first topic is a new CDC report on rising U.S. suicide rates. This week, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in the United States, known as the CDC, released a report on the trends they identified in suicide rates from 1999 to 2016.
We have to know that the CDC is the highest possible scientific
authority on public health.
Yes.
Yeah. So Public Health Authority, CDC, they're number one.
Yeah.
Most data were taken from the National Vital Statistics System, looking at people aged 10 and over. So that includes teenagers.
Yeah, and this is the equivalent of Statistic Canada.
Exactly.
The age 10, that really scares me. I mean, what were you thinking about when you were 10? I was thinking about school and Disney shows and my puppy.
I actually was suicidal when I was a kid, but that's okay.
Yeah, some kind could be suicidal, and some succeed to do that. There is a kid who inject themselves, who could suicide themselves easily.
Yeah, I almost made an attempt when I was a kid. So, okay, the biggest headline taken from the report is that the suicide rates have increased by 30% since 1999. Suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the United States.
So it's very important.
Yes, it's very significant. And, you know, after cancer and, you know, a few other things, it's the biggest cause of death. In 2016, almost 45,000 people died by suicide.
Wow.
Yeah. Adults aged 45 to 64 showed the largest increase, from around 13 people per 100,000 in 1999 to about 19 per 100,000 in 2016. And we rounded the numbers because it was just easier.
Yeah, there was almost something.
Right. Most of the deaths fell within this age range as well. There were 232,108. So that's more than 250,000 people who committed suicide in just the age range of 45 to 64, which in that period was baby boomers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so the survey did not include assisted suicides because the states where assisted suicide was legal during the survey period, Oregon, Washington, and Vermont, do not count assisted suicides in their suicide statistics.
And we have already said that a suicide is a suicide.
Right, right. And
that's clear.
And we've also said that hiding the suicides, the assisted suicides, and not counting them as suicides is bad public policy, because we need to know how many people are killing themselves.
Yes.
And when you set aside this other category of suicides that aren't really suicides, that's not giving you an accurate picture. So yes, this report is interesting, but it's also wrong because of that false information. And granted, in that period, it was only from 3 states where it was legalized. But, you know, the more states where it becomes legal, the more distorted the figures will be.
Yes.
Okay, suicide rates increased in every state but Nevada. So,
And why?
because of Las Vegas. I don't know.
No, because it was already very, very high.
Yes.
And it's difficult to go higher than very high.
Right. Nevada's rate was consistently high throughout the study period.
Yeah, and probably Las Vegas, yeah. When you lose a lot of money.
Yeah. Increases greater than 30% were seen in half of the US states, so that's 25. And there were 12 states where the increase ranged from 38 to 58%.
Wow.
That's incredible. The biggest rise in suicide rates for the 17-year period was 58% in North Dakota.
Hey, this is close to Canada.
Yeah, right next to Canada.
It's very, very, there is so much common thing with Canada in this area.
Yeah, exactly. So, and in fact, if you look at the, there's a site, you can, if you get the written version, there's a link to the actual study. And if you look at the map they have, the states where the increase was highest, most of them are in the north, where the winters are dark and cold.
Yeah. When the winter
that makes sense. I mean, seasonal depression.
Yes, yes. The biggest rise in, oh yeah, I already said that. Overall, the number of suicides increased by 1.5% per year. Among men, the suicide rate went up 1.1% every year, and the annual increase among women was 2.6%. Now, one thing we know about suicides among men and women is that more women attempt suicide, but more men complete it.
Yeah.
So that means that more women were completing suicides than usual. Okay, some of the contributing factors mentioned by researchers include being male, belonging to a racial minority, which goes along with what we talk about in terms of discrimination, relationship problems, including breakups or deaths, legal problems, eviction or loss of one's home, which is something that happens to people who are financially in trouble, physical health problems related to disability, job or financial problems, which, given the unemployment rate of people with disabilities, is pretty closely linked, access to lethal means among persons at risk, so the people who have other risk factors having access to guns or other means, and if we're talking about assisted suicide, talk about means, and poor coping and problem-solving skills. So those are some of the most important contributing factors.
Yeah.
Since suicide prevention largely focuses on mental health treatment and preventing reattempts, the social and economic factors, including those related to disability and isolation, are being overlooked, according to the report. In response to a 2012 private members bill sponsored by Harold Albrecht, MP Harold Albrecht, Canada came up with a national suicide prevention framework in 2016.
Oh, seems to be good.
Right, so that was a great idea, suicide prevention framework. The framework sets out the government of Canada's strategic objectives, guiding principles, and commitments related to suicide prevention. So, it discusses who is likely to consider suicide and why, and briefly touches on the role of government and nonprofit agencies can play in preventing suicide. But most of the proposed actions are related to the spread of information, awareness, continuing research, and defining best practices. Meanwhile, nearly 4,000 people have ended their lives since assisted suicide and euthanasia were legalized 3 years ago.
But no action.
Right.
Exactly. And it was what I noticed, it was also government talking to government. Legislation and decrees aren't going to help in the same way as if practical advice was being given to a social worker or somebody working in mental health.
Exactly. Exactly. It's the government talking to itself. And we all know about people talking to themselves.
Which it's less.
It's less obvious. Okay, Canada's suicide prevention framework doesn't say much about disability. People with disabilities are among the groups about whom knowledge gaps exist in the current research.
That's a minimum that could be said.
Yeah, I think that's the minimum, yeah. Disability supports are also mentioned as necessary for some veterans of the Canadian Armed Forces. And that's it for references to disability.
Wow.
The word appears 3 times in the framework, and 2 times it's related to disability supports.
So,
I mean, veterans definitely need specialized services, but there's many more ways you can acquire a disability.
Right.
Maybe it's just me, but age comes to mind way before the military.
Right. And yeah. But
obvious.
But again, you know, age is one of those things that people are starting to say, well, you know, he's old. It's, you know, kind of understandable. And they're pushing people who are old into that category of disposable. The word suicide is not actually defined anywhere in the framework.
Right, and you don't define it.
Right.
So what do you speak of?
Right, exactly. That's the question. Also, though the framework came out after Canada's assisted suicide and euthanasia legislation was adopted, there is no mention of these practices.
And they have not defined the word, maybe because they have difficulty to separate assisted suicide from a suicide, because both are suicide.
Right, exactly.
I almost want to hope that's the case, but we don't know for sure.
They may reinvent the dictionary.
Right. Well, they're just not thinking. That's sort of how I feel. They just don't seem to be thinking very clearly. Yeah. Canada could learn from the suicide prevention plan designed by the Suicide Prevention Resource Center for the state of Connecticut.
Oh,
and that came out, I can't remember when that came out, but it was like a couple of years ago. Besides the necessary collection of data, it includes a wide variety of practical procedures to reach disadvantaged groups before, during, and after a crisis. The proposal recommends mandatory suicide prevention training for social workers and licensed mental health providers.
Whoa!
Hey!
People, some action. Great.
An idea, something they're actually doing. Integration of suicide prevention into staff training for domestic violence centers and legal services specializing in immigrant populations. Yeah.
Great.
What an idea.
They do some action, just not just inform, not just spread the news. They do take action.
Right.
Great.
They also recommend incorporating suicide prevention into school curricula, which is important because we talked about it.
Yeah.
They recommend connecting hospital emergency rooms with organizations specializing in outpatient care. Because when somebody comes into the hospital and they're suicidal, it's not necessarily a good idea to put them in the hospital. That isn't necessarily going to help. And finally, offering assessment services in atypical locations, like places of worship or community centers or senior centers or, any kind of place where people are. So the Connecticut plan also includes specific provisions related to disability. It includes disability-specific risk factors for suicidality, including changes in health status, like when you hit a crisis or have an exacerbation of your disability, difficulty navigating the social and financial services, stress of chronic stigma and discrimination. Hey, who has that?
Wow.
Loss of or threat to independent living supports, and institutionalization or hospitalization. How many people have said, I'd rather die than live in an institution?
My mother, my father,
yeah,
and a lot of other people.
Yeah, adapt. That's basically they're kind of part of their informal motto. The Connecticut plan cites advocates and researchers who have personal experience with disability.
Yeah. Wow. Somebody think.
Yeah.
In this
yeah.
Right.
And that is including Carol Gill and Bill Peace. And also Stephen Mendelson and Kathy Ludlam were key movers behind getting that plan in place. So they aren't necessarily credited in the citations, but they were very involved in making it happen. So it was good. The plan also recommends training practitioners to work specifically with disabled people. Hey, what an idea! Avoiding the assumption that suicide is a reasonable response to disability. Wow!
That's what we said since we exist.
Yeah. 5 years. And focusing instead on mental health and other social circumstances that could make life seem unbearable regardless of existing disability. So those are reasonable recommendations.
Yeah.
Okay, in a disturbing trend, suicide prevention organizations continue to try to redefine suicide to exclude deaths facilitated by the medical profession, i.e. assisted suicides or euthanasia. In 2016, the Canadian Association for Suicide Prevention released a statement saying that they, quote, are not talking about suicide, unquote, when they refer to physician-assisted death. They are supposedly two different acts with different intentions. And we talked about this distinction in our webcast of August 26th of 2016.
And what was the conclusion? This is false.
Right.
There is no
suicide is suicide no matter how it's done.
Suicide is suicide is suicide.
Yes.
Similarly, the American Association of Suicidology last year said that legal physician-assisted death should not be considered cases of suicide, which is another group that's trying to redefine suicide.
Yeah.
In response, advocates from Not Dead Yet in the United States leafleted at the AAS annual conference this past April. Not Dead Yet's research analyst, Stephen Drake, said that the AAS has wrongly, quote, begun to narrow its mission by declaring the suicides of some people to not be suicides at all, unquote. So this is a very important point, how it's defined, because it's not just dictionaries, it's legal definitions, and legal definitions are important for how statistics are counted, how public health programs are governed, and all those things. Okay. In addition, broadening eligibility criteria are eroding the very idea of suicide prevention. The Council of Canadian Academies is considering extending eligibility for Canada's assisted suicide and euthanasia program to mature minors, people with psychiatric disabilities, and to incompetent people via directive.
The slippery slope is becoming a cliff,
Right.
and this cliff is dig down, and dig down every day.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
We predict that the slippery slope exists. We was fault. It's not existing. It's astonishing as much it is present and existing.
Right. And you can follow the links that we included in our text version to the webcasts on those topics. The recommendations of the Council of Canadian Academies are due in December. As the Netherlands and Belgium euthanize ever larger groups of people with mental illness or who are tired of life, what used to be suicidal risk factors are now becoming valid reasons to justify euthanasia. So again, another kind of slippery slope.
Yeah.
Like
you want to add anything?
I was just about to. Like the Scottish woman that we heard about this morning. She was constantly harassed at work and presumably depressed and feeling down. She decided that she wanted to go to Switzerland, and the Swiss clinic would not have had a problem with ending her life.
Right.
Thankfully, her family intervened. She's still alive.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, assisted suicide for workplace harassment. There's something disconnected
wrong
there. Yeah.
Something smells fishy.
Yeah.
And when it smells fishy, when it, it is.
But again, we talk about the effects of discrimination, and that's exactly what happens to people when they are experiencing harassment and discrimination. It ruins their self-esteem. It causes incredible stress and depression, and people want to die. There you go. Okay, our second topic, the American Medical Association to continue studying its position on assisted suicide. This is kind of bad news. You may remember we reported in our webcast of May 18th, the American Medical Association's Council on Ethical and Judicial Affairs recommended that the AMA continue to oppose assisted suicide as, quote, fundamentally incompatible with the physician's role as healer, unquote, and to avoid medical aid in dying, unquote, and, quote, death with dignity, unquote. At the association's annual meeting this week, 56% of the delegates voted to send the matter back to the council for further study. The current policy will stay in place until a new vote is taken. So basically they said, no, we don't like your recommendation, keep studying it.
Yeah, it's a kind of diplomatic way that we doesn't want to fire you, but we are not exactly in line with your recommendation.
Right.
Yeah, it seems
the recommendation is scientific.
Right.
If I was at that meeting, I would feel kind of pigeonholed.
Yeah.
We don't like what you have to say, so we're going to keep sending you back until you agree with us.
Right, right. That's the wrong answer. We're going to send you back until you bring us the right answer. Yeah, and that's not.
But they came back with an answer very close to that one because it was scientific.
Right. Well, I mean, they came up with a certain answer, and a lot of it, as I talked about at the time, a lot of the reasons they used were fairly conservative, based on fairly conservative values. And I had suggested that they might want to look at more incorporating more progressive reasons to take the same position, because people who support assisted suicide think of themselves as very progressive, and they don't want to think of themselves as conservative and, stuck in the mud and clinging to the past and that sort of thing, which is how they perceive continuing the position of opposing assisted suicide. So if the Council on Ethical and Judicial Affairs could come up with justifications that were more progressive, they might get more support for the position, which is a perfectly progressive position. That's just me. Okay, Matt Valliere, Executive Director of the Patients' Rights Action Fund, pointed out that referring the question back to the committee was, quote, a lost opportunity and a failure to stand against a policy that has grave consequences for everyone, but especially persons living with illness, disabilities, or socioeconomic disadvantage. Assisted suicide is not medical care.
We could not tell it more clearly.
Yeah, exactly. Do you have anything you want to add, Taylor?
Just a quick clarification for any other Canadians who might be listening to this and also not know much about the purpose of the association. Would it amount to a blanket statement from most of the country's doctors and medical authorities approving assisted suicide?
Right. Well, let's see. The recommendation.
At this point, of course, they're going neutral and not approving it yet. But
exactly. So that was the alternative, but essentially they're holding any action. So they're continuing with their position to oppose assisted suicide because they're not doing anything. And the proposal was to reiterate their opposition to assisted suicide, and that is the proposal that was rejected. So the 56% of the delegates are basically saying we support assisted suicide, essentially.
Yeah, but with now a majority,
right,
6%. So if only 3% of people change their mind, this is a new the target point.
Right, exactly. But
the balance point.
You know, but in fact, what they're saying is they don't like the justifications that were given for the decision, and asking for a new set of justifications. And that's what I was referring to.
Who did that exist?
Right. Right. Okay. If you want more information about the subjects that we discuss here, you can visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/toujours vivant, not dead yet. Visit our website at tvndy.ca. You can email us at info@tv-ndy.ca, or you can follow us on Twitter @TVNDY. Thanks to Christian and to Taylor for helping out. Thanks to you for being there, and we will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.